Hello. I'm going to show you a bit about the Active Directory Domain Services role that's built into Windows Server 2012. I have a test lab up, as you see right here. These are available on Microsoft TechNet's website, so if you ever want to play around in a virtual lab and have a few Windows servers at your disposal, this is a great free tool to use. So right now we're just going to discuss we'll call it ADDS for short, Active Directory Domain Services, and the interface of it and the various objects that you can find within, and those are the objects in which you have to manage, and those objects make up Active Directory as a whole. So let's get started. Your first thing you want to do is you can go to the Server Manager, and from there you can launch the tools for the role that you want to configure or use. So we're going to take a look at Active Directory, users, and computers. Okay, so now you see here, this is our organization. Right here is it's the interface of Active Directory. So inside this interface, you find what is the domain. Now the domain can be part of a forest. If you think about it in the form of forest and trees, all the trees make up the forest, and your trees can be various organizations that are under one umbrella. In this case, we only have one organization, contoso.com, and that's going to be our domain that we're using in this instructional video. Now, below it, you'll see the groups or folders that are all made once the Active Directory is installed. Because remember, Active Directory, it provides a database that it stores and manages information about your network resources and application-specific data for these applications that use Active Directory. So the server that's running Active Directory is called your domain controller. And the administrators, such as you or myself, we use the Active Directory to organize all these elements of the network, such as user accounts, computer accounts, and other device accounts into some type of hierarchical containment structure. This containment structure includes, as I said, forests, domains in the forest, and the folders, or as they're technically called, organizational units that you see below. So let's go into the first one that we want to discuss, which are users. So if you go to the user folder here, these are, for the most part, the default users that are created when you install the Active Directory service. So you'll see that you have a guest user, the administrator user, which is the user that has all the power, and you'll see other groups. And we'll get into the groups later. Right now we're just concerned with users. I want to take a look at the managed users, so the users we'll create, because most of the time these type of groups, domain admins, domain computers, controllers, you're just adding users that you create to these groups for various permissions, but we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So let's go to the manage objects and we'll see users. Okay, so we have 3 users now that are in our fake organization. We have Alice Sichu and Ben Smith and ADRMS. Like I said, this was a virtual lab, so these are all pre-created, so we didn't have any control over these. So now, these users, you require a user account in Active Directory to be able to log onto a computer in that domain. So if a computer is part of the contoso.com domain, you need to have a user account in order to log in. If you don't, you're unfortunately not going to get anywhere. So we need to establish these accounts to identify a user, because these users are more or less representing physical entities such as me and you. And they need to be able, the computers need to be able to decipher that you're a legit person in this domain, and that they can authenticate you and give you permissions to use the other objects in the domain. So that's basically where the users live. And you can move these users around, but right now we're just going to keep it simple and keep them in one folder. Because now, also remember that users, you can grant or deny access to other objects or other resources on the network based upon these accounts. So they could work two ways. So if you want Ben Smith to have access to the computers in accounting, but not have access to the computers in engineering, you can do that, all via because he has a account on the domain. Now those go into further permission sets that we're not going to cover in this activity, but just wanted to mention those. So let's go in. I want to show you how to create a user. Okay, so basically if we go into the user area and we go to new, and then we go down to user, this is going to bring up our new object for a user account. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to give it my name, Steve. And we're going to go with a fake last name. We're going to go Davids, Steve Davids. And my user logon is going to be sdavids@contoso.com. So this is going to be my logon name. So whenever I sit down at a computer that's part of the contoso.com domain, I'm going to enter sdavids as my username. Let's go to password. I'm going to give myself a password. And I'm going to say that I don't need to change it at my next logon. And I'm going to say that it never expires. As you see, you can make a password for a user and the user can never change the password. This is great if you were making a user account that was a service account. So a service account are accounts that are on the domain that are utilized by IT for various services or tasks. And you wouldn't want somebody who gained access to that account being able to change the password. You would only want them to be able to change it from the Active Directory interface. So this is a good precaution to use for those type of accounts. Let's press next. Steve Davids, finish. See that? Doesn't meet the password policy requirements. So policy requirements are minimum password length, complexity, and you can't use a previously used password. So let's go back and let's make this a little bit more difficult. Okay, so got it added. I basically added a password that had capital letters, lowercase letters, symbols, and numbers. So pretty much then you're going to be safe with a password that's going to meet your organization's complexity requirements. And you can lower those or heighten them depending on how you wish, but usually they're set pretty decently from the get-go. So now you see Steve Davids in my group of users. So now that I have Steve Davids created, I can now assign him permissions to OUs in the domain. I can assign him permissions to various computers. You know, he is now a user that has authorization or deny capabilities. And now I can hand this account out to the actual Steve Davids, or we can just use it for our testing purposes here. But that's pretty much how you go about creating these users. And the same thing goes in this window. If I didn't want Alice Chichu, she wasn't in our organization anymore, we can just go to her and we can disable her. So now if she sits down at any machine or wants to utilize a network resource, she's not going to be able to, but her account still exists in the event she does come back. Hello and welcome back. Took a quick break right there, but let's get moving on. We covered user objects briefly and what they are, what their purpose is, how to create a new one, and also how to disable. But let's go to their sister objects, so to speak, and computers. All right, as you see, we have lots of computers in here. I mean, in Active Directory terms, this is really nothing. Active Directory is used to handling hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of computers. So this is a good little start. As you see, just judging from their names, we have a few different types. We have servers, we have VM hosts, we have what looks like deployment servers, maybe just a regular old computer. So it doesn't look like any personal machines in here yet, but those are added as you add new computers to the domains. So one thing I want to tell you is a computer that's running any version of Windows, whether it was XP, since retired, 7, 8, 8.1, 10, or if they're running Windows Server 2008, 8R2, 2012, or even the new incoming 2016, they need computer accounts on a domain in order to interact with other network resources or objects on the domain. So they have to be joined to the domain. And when they join the domain, you will find them in your Active Directory interface, as you see here. This is the base computer group. They all start out in here, but you can move them to the organizational units within your hierarchy in order to better organize or better to apply permission sets. So each computer account has to be unique. Cannot have the same names. So you can't have server 1, server 1, server 1. It has to be server 1, 2, and 3. If you go to join a machine with the same name to a domain, it will flag it right away, and they'll say that it cannot be joined. So in that case, you're going to have to change your names, get a good naming structure going. I know I like to name my machines depending, usually the username and then the version of Windows they're running, or some people like to name them by the computer's asset tag if it has one. So it all depends on your organization, but I wouldn't just name them, Jimmy Smith. I would give them some type of identifier, like Jimmy Smith Win 10-997. Maybe 997 is the last 3 of his asset tag. So each thing has to be unique. Now, the computers, once you join into the domain, they're added here automatically. You can create a new computer object. I personally never use this, but it is usable when you want to pre-create an object in an organizational unit. So if you delegated permissions out to a user to join their own computer to a domain, it would be in the right organizational unit and obtaining the right permissions right from the start. So that's a reason to use that, but I personally never do. And just the same way, if you wanted to say, this machine here, this one, they're not with the organization anymore, you could simply disable it. So now that machine is no longer allowed to log onto the domain, no matter who sits at that machine. They could be an administrator, they could be Steve Davids, who we just created, they could be Alice Chichu. It doesn't matter. If that machine's disabled, it's not logging on. So we're going to re-enable that one. As you see, if you go to properties, you have some various tabs and tells you some brief information about these machines. So administrator 1's running server 2012 data center. It's a member of domain computers. We're going to get to that. And you have delegation. You have the location, managed by, and dial-in things. This is useful for VPN connectivity. Okay, so brief overview of computers. Computers are not too in-depth. So I'm going to move along to group objects right now. So as you see, you have your manage objects and you have groups. Okay, these are the ones that are created in our test lab already. But if you remember, when we were in users, you had all these groups. So all these security groups. Okay, there's different types of groups. There's security groups. There's distribution groups. Okay, there are global groups. There are universal groups. There are domain locals. So there's all different types depending on how far you want your security to reach in the forest, so to speak, or depending upon what you want to do. Security objects, or security groups, I should say, are useful for applying permission sets or applying what computers or what users are part of a certain group. So if you had an accounting security group, you want to only put the people in accounting there. So now, if you had computers that you only wanted people in accounting to log on to, you could just say authenticated by security group accounting instead of the all domain users. So now only people in accounting can log on to those machines. If it's a global group, it only applies to your domain. If it's universal, it can apply to all domains across the forest. So enterprise admins is a group of people with almighty power, just like domain admins, but they can control all the domains in the forest, unlike domain admins who can only control the domain that they're a part of. All right. And then you don't see any here, but the other group is distribution groups. And distribution groups are exactly what they sound like, distribution. And what do we do with distribution? For those who aren't email administrators, you distribute email. So if you had, I'm going to use my accounting group again. If you had an accounting group and you didn't want to type in 20 recipients in the email, you could simply have a distribution group for accounting and add that in, and that'll go to all the members of the accounting distribution group. So it's a brief overview of that, because I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself here and didn't explain the groups though. But as you can gather from my descriptions of these, the groups they're collections of users and computer accounts. So they can consist of both objects or just one or the other. And they basically help you simplify administration, because you don't want to run your administration principles based on users and computers. You want to base it on groups. So you want it to apply to this group or apply to that group. It just makes things a lot easier, because when you're doing things in the moment, it's easy to remember, but when you revisit them a few months later, it's hard to keep track of all these changes that you might have made. So you want to make these groups as identifiable and as simple as possible. So let's go to some of the pre-created ones. You have Hyper-V servers and web form. So there's a couple of security groups that they pre-made. But let's say we mentioned the accounting group before. Let's make one. Okay. So we go to new and we go to group, and I'm going to make accounting. Okay. I'm going to keep it as a global group because I want it to apply to everyone in the domain, and I want it to be a security group. Now I'm going to go into accounting. It has no members. It's a lonely place to be right now. So let's add some people. So I know there was Alice, right? Got her. I know there was Steve. And I know there was Ben. There you go. So now we're going to put Alice, Steve, and Ben, in our accounting group. There they are. They are members of accounting. So now apply. Now you see that. So now if we wanted to run any permissions based on this group, we have it, and we can simply take people in and out. We don't have to remember who has permissions to what areas. If we assign permissions based on groups, you simply need to be a part of the group. It's easy for anybody to look at it and see who has permissions. So now, also in addition to adding people, you can add computers. So if you said, I want that administration computer I saw before. I want to add that to here. All right. Computers aren't normally part of the search for adding objects, so we like to check it. Now let's type, I think it was admin. Okay. That was the computer we saw before. We're going to add it. I'm going to add it. So now this computer is part of accounting. So what does that mean? That means that computer is part of accounting. So anybody who logged into that computer has the same privileges as the members of the accounting group. Is that great to do? Not really. So let's take that administrator computer out, because we want to base our permissions on users, not computers. In certain cases, you base it on computers, but a lot of times you want to base it just on users, because you're able to fine-tune and keep track of your access that way. So now that we understand a little bit about the groups and how to create them, let's take a look at some of the pre-made built-in ones. So if we went to domain admins, now this is the first time I'm looking at this domain. I don't know who's a domain admin. I want to know, because I want to know who has the almighty privileges. So if I go into the group, I go to members, I see, okay, great, only administrator has that. So now I'm sure that only the administrator account has privileges. I don't need to worry about anybody additional doing anything. I just need to, hopefully no one has the administrator password. But now we saw other groups here that were all pre-made. Let's take a look at domain users. Okay, it looks like every one of our members of the domain are domain users. Now, we created Steve Davids. Did we add him to domain users? No, we didn't. But it's part of the new user account policy in this domain to automatically add any users that are created to domain users. This is a great step. It's automatic. It's by default. It's great to have, because domain users usually have privileges to anywhere on the domain unless you remove their privileges and assign it to a specific group. And the rest of these groups, as you see, are schema admins, read-only domain controllers, DNS admins, DHCP. These are for other tasks. We're not going to get into those right now, but those are definitely worthwhile to understand what those members of those security groups are able to accomplish on a domain. And in our next area we're going to go to are organizational units, and the organizational units help us, quote unquote, organize where our users and groups and computers go. Okay, and our last object that we are going to go over in the Active Directory interface is organizational units. Right now, over in this side here, you're basically looking at organizational units or containers. Organizational unit, it's basically a folder, but it's particularly useful because it's a directory object and it can contain within the domains other organizational units. So if you have a file folder and you put other folders inside of it that they pertain to the folder they're being enclosed in, it's basically the same thing. And these containers or organizational units, they help you place users, groups, computers, and all the objects we learned about previously into them. And helps you better organize or develop a hierarchical structure to your domain. And you're kind of wondering, well, why would I do this? And that's reasons you'll get into later, is because you want to develop a structure or a hierarchy or a logical groupings, because that's how you're going to apply group policy settings. And group policy settings are your settings and policies that allow users to do certain tasks, allow computers to do certain tasks, grant permissions, deny permissions. They're basically your rule set for your entire organization. It's how you can lock down computers or open up computers. It's how you can deploy software. It's how you can deploy printers. Basically, everything you want to do lives and dies off group policy settings, and having a logical structure to your organization through properly placed organizational units is the key. Your organizational units, they also help you develop an administrative model that you can scale out to any size. So, and by scaling out, you could say, well, if you wanted a number of administrators in your domain, but you only want a handful of administrators that have full rights to the domain, but you want some to be able to have administrator rights to their OU, you could do that. So you could say a couple of OUs down, Ben Smith has privileges on that organizational unit to add computers and users, but he can't add any above that or apply group policy settings. So it's a way for you to delegate the proper permissions to people who need them at certain levels of the organization. I'm just going to show you what I mean by an OU and how to, I guess, structure it, organize it. So it's like right here, we have our manage objects. We have groups and users, okay? So say, for example, I want to manage some of these computers. I don't want to just manage them in the computer group, because now group policy settings that I apply to here are going to apply to all of these, and that just might not be right. So let's go, and we're going to make a new organizational unit, and we're going to call it member servers. So right here, we're going to put our servers into here. And we're going to keep this checked, protect container from accidental deletion. This just helps if somebody is kind of a little lackadaisical in Active Directory and likes to press delete. It'll give them a warning that they can't do it. So they have to go and uncheck this box afterwards if they want to delete it. So it's a little precautionary measure. And I see we have member servers. We'll go a little bit farther. And we already have domain controllers, so we don't want to make that. So let's go up here, and we're going to say server 1, 2, and 3. Oops. Server 1, 2, and 3, we're going to move into there. So we're going to highlight them. We're going to move, manage objects, member servers. Boom, there they are. Now, let's say, for example, we wanted to build this out a little bit more. We wanted to get a little bit more defined. Say we had offices on the East Coast, West Coast, and Europe. So now we go under our member servers, new, organizational unit, East Coast office. Unit. West Coast office. And Europe office. Okay, so now we have 3 distinct offices on the member servers. So we can get this a little bit more finely tuned. Say server 1 was in our East Coast office. We could just move it over there. This is just saying, beware what you're doing. There could be objects associated with this. Say server 2 is on our West Coast office, and server 3 is in our Europe office. So now, those 3 servers exist in their proper offices, and we can apply the proper group policy settings or permissions to these folders that we wish, because these are all different, different time zones, maybe different employee bases, different needs. So that's why you want to use your organizational units to build a hierarchy that works for your organization. Not 2 organizations are the same, so what works somewhere might not work other places. It's kind of, you figure it out as you go, and you find that works best. And that's going to be the end of our topic, covering Active Directory domain services, particularly the different types of objects which are contained within, such as the users, the groups, the computers, and the organizational units. Like I said earlier, you can go to Microsoft TechNet, and they have free virtual labs where you can practice these theories, and you can practice on a different number of servers in various configurations to better improve your skills.